Welcome to another episode of Closed. We are excited to have with us again, returning guest, returning champion.
In person this time.
In person. Last time it was virtual. So we're starting to kind of bring in the virtual people to our beautiful in-person abode. Keith Powers, third generation resident of Stuyvesant Town, which we were talking about before, which we'll talk about a little bit more, lifelong Manhattan advocate. Served as, your biography is way too long, served as a city council member for the 4th District from 2018 to 2025, and more recently won a special election for District 74 for the New York State Assembly, winning over 82% of the vote. I wanted to make sure
I didn't know that was possible until now. Yeah.
Still less than 100.
Still less than 100.
So there's something to shoot for. But you're bringing your City Hall experience to Albany at a pretty critical time for housing, public safety, and other issues impacting New Yorkers. But first off, welcome back to the show.
You guys having me with the new title. Yeah.
Well, look, I mean, obviously the issue. The mayor went to the White House and talked about affordability. So, like, this is the issue that is on everybody's mind. I know it's an issue that's near and dear to your heart. Why don't we do a overview of what's the state of affordability from your vantage point in New York City right now, and we can talk a little bit about kind of where it's going to go from here.
It's unaffordable. That is the state. And
the podcast is over.
The podcast is over. We have to. I think the way out is actually the most complicated part of it. And I think you get into a housing crisis in a city like New York in a whole lot of different ways. I talk a lot about the lack of housing that has been added and built over generations of time. My famous line I always say is the way you got elected in Manhattan years ago or New York City years ago was to say no and say it loudly and proudly to so many things, which leads to a sort of growing problem into a crisis, but also not to forget that New York City is such a popular and desirable place to live. Obviously, some core places like where we're sitting in Manhattan are so heavily desirable. We are an international city. We are not other cities in the United States. We are international. We are on high demand. People want to own a first home here. A lot of people want to have a second home here. So there's just so many different growing pressures on it. And then the specific policies that have led us down this path. And I think for somebody like myself, you track it in many different ways. What's the present state of it? And not to be nostalgic or not to look back, but also kind of what was it like when it felt like it was more affordable and why? Mm-hmm. And so what did it feel like when I was growing up here? And without question, there are good things that led us to this point. Becoming a safer city is one of them. Becoming a more prosperous city is one of them. Becoming more internationally appealing. But I think not only in the city, but regionally, we just have a lot more work to do. And people are going to, this isn't just a city for the people that live within the 5 boroughs. It's a city for the whole world, let alone the people that live in the numerous areas around it to come here. So we have to think about it, I think, a little bit bigger than just the neighborhood we're looking at any present time.
What was one or more of the bigger surprises for you when you got to Albany in terms of how the lawmakers there view the city's affordability crisis versus when you were inside the frame here in New York City?
That's a great question. The tools are different. So in the city, a lot of the work, the power you have, great power you have as a council member is around the zoning and land use. And what I would say is the final decision-making power that's changed a little bit over what projects get built in your district and how much authority is ceded to you by your colleagues and the mayor and the council speaker to make those decisions and to negotiate. That has changed a little bit in the last year with some amendments to all of that. In the state, you're dealing a lot more with tenant protections and rent stabilization and the sort of and insurance and the ecosystem of regulations that come from the state that help drive pull different levers for that. So we don't have the exact same power to say yes to this project. We have political influence on that. But I'll tell you a couple of things. One is we're having a debate right now in Albany as part of our budget process around changing some of what they call SECRA, which is a process by which it's a regulatory process basically for projects that are getting built in the city. It's environmental review, but not a lot of it is not really that pertinent to the environment at this point. And look, I've been probably one of the few voices in my conference saying we have to really change something here. It should not take 2 years to get something approved, to then let you go through the regular process of rezoning. There should be a shot clock to tell you how much time before this thing gets approved. But there's a lot of, it's kind of easy in all arenas to just let things stay the same and be a little bit afraid what the consequence may be. And that's how you end up in a crisis. But look, I think just the levers are different. And in the council, people are coming and going because the term limit is so much more. Where in the assembly, I show up, I have 8 years experience in the city council, but I'm the most junior member in the assembly. So I think I can offer a lot in terms of expertise and know-how and understanding government. I'm still the seniority at the bottom of the food chain.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I know, you kind of just briefly touched on stabilization, tenant stabilization. Obviously, this is a really big issue in the last mayoral election. It's I think every guest that we've had on the podcast has talked about rent stabilization, either from like this is killing us perspective, when we have developers and landlords on the podcast, and then or the politicians that we have on and journalists are talking about it more from an affordability context. And how do you marry these two competing views, and how are you personally kind of bringing your own experience with this to kind of make things more affordable for New Yorkers?
Well, for starters, I will say it's not going anywhere, outside of an act of the Supreme Court or something like that. So we have to just reckon with that and deal with that. So when people complain about it, it feels like wasted time and energy almost.
A lot of people complaining about it don't even really understand what.
Well, don't understand what it is, and they think they have misconceptions about it. And I think people don't understand what the numbers look like on how many people are there, or what it would look like if we just evaporated it tomorrow, and means million plus tenants don't have sort of predictability in their rents anymore, or could lose their apartments. That's a crisis on its own. But look, I think that there's a lot of different things around stabilization. One is the price predictability. It's kind of set up as like an anti-price gouging law in a certain housing vacancy with a certain housing vacancy, low housing vacancy. You create this protection structure around tenants. What seems sometimes unfair is the people who don't have it are wondering why they don't have it, and why there's these like different regimes. And obviously the people that there's many developers and landlords who don't like it because of all the sort of variables that it or limitations it puts on them. But I will say this, I'll tell you my personal story. I grew up in a rent stabilized apartment. I grew up in the most prominent rent stabilized community in probably the world, if not New York City. And I do think it was really important for protecting the middle class in that neighborhood. And when we saw the laws changed, we saw what really bad practices looked like really quickly. The story of Stuyvesant Town is MetLife built, owned, operated it forever. And then circa 2006 sells it. We have a new landlord comes in, goes bankrupt on their deal.
Is that Blackstone?
No, it was Tishman Speyer at the time. Tishman Speyer buys it. They, spend, I would say, almost $1 billion too much on it. Just a casual bill. And the tenants actually put in a bid that looked actually way closer to what the value was in retrospect. But it was predicated on this idea that you could turn over these apartments using the loopholes or whatever you want to call them in the law to deregulate apartments, and found that was not as easy as they thought. But many tenants who were living there, they were getting notices under the. I'll give you one story quick. A couple I know got divorced, and the husband moved to New Jersey, and with him took his car and bought a house there.
His name was on the lease.
His name was on the lease, just like hers, and she got a non-primary residence notice under her door and had to go to court. But it cost her thousands in fees. And there are definitely people who would say, and I have met those who said, I just didn't want to fight. I moved. And so like those stories are real. But
and there's worse stories.
Way worse. But also just people getting $1,000 rent increase. It's sort of a take it or leave it. If you don't, we'll jack your rent. Somebody else will come in at higher rent. Yeah. So that was a bad system. Blackstone bought it in 2015. after the Tishman Speyer went bankrupt, and they have definitely had a much and the law changed shortly after that.
Yeah.
But I think they've had a much more long-term stable view of the community and understand the mistakes that were made by their predecessor, and I think have a different vantage point, and I think have found that balance in a way of bringing new tenants in and marketing, but also how to manage the sort of complicated nature of it. But it's obviously in the center of the conversation again because of the mayor's rent freeze. Other laws have been passed that pull out the different levers of it.
What you mentioned the law changed shortly thereafter. I think you're talking about the 2019 HSTPA that changed how rent stabilized apartments were treated, how they're reviewed. Do you think that law so far has kind of lived up to its promise? What do you think are you had to pick like pull one thing that's been really great that followed that law, maybe one thing that's not quite as good? What how would you?
Look, I think I think it has. I mostly think it has done a great job of. No, I know. I'll give you both. I'll give you both. Look, I think that it had been almost 20 plus years of where these exemptions had put in place to rent stabilization that let them take apartments out of the program, which thereby, and by the way, not a tenant out, like not like, hey, I make a lot of money, I'm not getting rent stabilization. That now applies to the next person too. And
By the way, the former makes some sense, right? Like tying it to
listen, the rule basically said if you make too much money, you shouldn't get rent stabilization. I don't think that should travel with the unit. I think the unit then should stay. And if somebody moves in afterwards, they are. I mean, look, it gets a little tricky from there, but you shouldn't vacate the whole unit. But there were all these regulations in place that basically became the ways that landlords found ways to put some pressure on tenants, try to get them out, and try to get the apartment out of. We had the worst practices, but we had the subtle everyday practices going on too. They fix it. I think there was a lot of good in terms of taking pressure off of tenants. I think some still remaining issues that need to be attended to. We talk a lot about the warehousing of the units that need to do substantial improvement on there. There are elected officials who do not believe this is happening. I have debated them. I know it's happening. Different scales. Like some apartments are in deep need repair, probably others need stuff, but I think figuring out a solution to that would be probably top priority. And I think because of that, and maybe some other financial pressures, you also have to be concerned about the state of some of these buildings, long-term financially, even short-term financially, and what it might mean for the tenants that live in those buildings and the owners, of course, to have an asset that is underwater and so forth and so on. So that is an issue we need to get our heads on straight about, is how are we going to fix this solution without totally deregulating or doing something crazy to tenants.
is that a solution that's being pursued in Albany right now? Is that being?
It has been a lot of conversation. I mean, it's not like it's in the budget conversation right now, presently. And I think there's disagreement on how you get from point A to point B. But also there's, I think, not an acknowledgement. There's not even an acknowledgement by some elected officials. I think smart ones kind of know what's going on. But I think
let's name names.
Listen, the time and place you might get some names. No, but I think honestly, I think we do need to do it. I've not heard a lot of shaking of things like up there on this presently, but I think it's in constant conversation. I think the question is really how are we gonna?
Yeah, to me that seems like the way to kind of, again, it's interesting to us because we have a lot of guests and they're almost like on two complete opposite sides of the spectrum. But the happy middle ground is like having affordable housing stock, but also making sure that owner operators are making some money off of their buildings, right? Like you need both things.
Also, you want 50,000, let's say it's 50,000, 40,000. You want those units and who wants to be living in them. That's like, that unlocks like a lot of help. That's more than we're building. And it is a way to get yourself a lot of units really quickly. And you need a short-term solution to get those off online again. And then you can't let this continue to be a problem. So there might be a short-term way to fix it, but you also need to think about the long-term way. It's not going to be a perpetual problem. Yeah. But like those, 42,000, whatever the number is, like that's just how it's like forget like the landlord. It's like, this is housing and we need it. And if you could put 10,000 on in a few months' time after repairs, that's 10,000 you don't have. So,
Yeah.
and by the way, like the incentive for a lot of people who are fighting and stopping housing from being built in their own neighborhoods, they should be more incentivized because this is another way to help, tackle the crisis. The other thing I'd say is if we also can look at other costs, like insurance seems to be a really a big problem that I'm hearing from folks now. If you can start addressing those other costs, you also, create you help financially
Right.
with those buildings too. So this is one part of the problem, but I think, I'm talking to a lot of people in the affordable housing about the insurance issue right now. And there are seems like real attempts to try to start solving for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, another solution that we've talked a lot about in this podcast, and you help pursue in your time at City Council, is rezoning, right, and creating more housing stock through rezoning. You talk about kind of your role in the Midtown South rezoning process and how that it looks to the future in terms of creating more housing stock.
Sure. I'll just note two rezonings that we did, and they're both in Midtown. One is Midtown East and one's in Midtown.
We don't want to talk about Midtown East, only Midtown.
But Midtown South, but I think they're both truly will look back and say they were very successful. Midtown East was about revitalizing commercial space and getting a lot of transit improvements. That's how we got the new JP Morgan headquarters, the new One Vanderbilt building. We're getting a revitalized Grand Hyatt. Citadel just said they're going to do a new building here. So in my 8 years, we were able to do a whole lot. And that's going to be like really, really successful in like commercial space. But Midtown South and the whole office conversion conversation, I think, is a really good story about government working because, during the COVID crisis, everybody was talking about the emptying out of the buildings, and that has stabilized. But we knew there were going to be assets that needed help. And by the way, pre-COVID might have wanted to convert, by the way. And in areas in Midtown South that desperately could use a residential component, and they're just lifting up of the community there and repurposing these assets. So we did a few things. We got a tax credit in Albany passed that assisted with the conversions. We changed the rules we changed the year by which you can convert to make it a lot later so newer buildings could convert too. We changed the FAR, which is basically almost like how big you can build a building in Midtown. We made that a lot bigger. And those are all things that were conceptually in place. And then Midtown South is where we took everything and put into place. So we rezoned at a much higher density. We used the earlier deadline to allow the early date to create more opportunities for buildings. They're going to use that tax credit, but they needed a place to go. And Midtown South is going to there's some buildings around Midtown East that are going to already converting. Midtown South is going to be like 10,000 new units are probably going to, maybe more. And the reason I think the whole office conversion things works is because people told us so much how it was not going to work. Well, how are you going to do the bathrooms and the elevator? And I'm like, if there is an opportunity, people will figure it out. You got to create the landscape for it, and people will figure it out. And so we're going to see a combo. We're going to see some in building conversions. We might see some new tear downs and new buildings. But that is a neighborhood that shouldn't just have empty buildings or sitting there waiting to be leased. It should be people walking on the streets after 8 p.m. and creating a new residential community around that. I think it's going to prove to be really a great. I'm not biased, but I think it's going to be a really great victory for Midtown. And we didn't go to the outer boroughs. We went right in the heart.
I was going to say, it's like you could walk to the Knick game.
Yeah.
You got West Side Yards, all those new buildings, like a whole new city over there. So they're definitely.
And by the way, I actually think it kind of complements Hudson Yards because I think Hudson Yards is kind of sitting out there still, people kind of figuring out what it is. Yeah. And I think having more going on in the whole in between there, I think will create just a lot more vitality.
Yeah. Because it's probably the closest cluster of like brand new Class A office buildings, but you also, it's very high end shopping.
Yes, and it's far west for people who want to live there. This brings you a little closer to the subways. So, and then look, with that will come
Hudson Yards is where I walked to after the Knicks game to get a Uber home to Westchester.
Wow. I thought you were gonna say like blow off steam when they lose, but maybe both. Yeah, no, I mean, look, it's this will be close to like everything. It'll be really nice. Yeah, and after that will come, when people start showing up, the supermarkets and other things will start showing up too.
Yeah. What do we've had some developers on here who have kind of started to take advantage of the Midtown South rezoning and Midtown East rezoning.
Yeah.
What, from your perspective as a lifelong New Yorker, someone who certainly cares about affordable housing, what do you want developers to prioritize as they're kind of converting these office buildings? What do you think is important for New Yorkers to have and for developers to be thinking about? So we can yell at them when they come.
Yeah, it's a good question. Look, I want eventually over time, we are going to need to build out the additional infrastructure of like accommodating residential more than work. So we have to think a little bit long term about like the streetscape and open space and things like that. It's not immediately their issue. Look, we want affordability. Our plan has a lot of affordability in it. We certainly want people to go further. And take advantage of new density and things like that. I don't think I have any. We lay the rules out for them. They should go do it. And hopefully there's a healthy dialogue when they, with the city and when they start moving through that process. But we want the ones who are looking at it to do it. And look, we don't have a mandate. Like if you want to build a new building, build it. If you want to convert, I think there will be many who convert in the building. And I think it'd be interesting to see some of these new buildings like become residential. There are a lot of them are like lofty space and some of that. That'd be interesting. Or some will be combos. So we don't have a mandate for them. We're just creating the opportunity. I tell them make some nice buildings. Don't make us look back 20 years and hate the thing we was there. Make them nice.
I know one thing that a lot of developers have tried to avail themselves of is the tax abatement, 467M tax abatement. Is that deadline coming up to commence construction, or is Albany thinking about extending that?
So that's the office conversion one, because there's also the 495. I don't know what the deadline is on that, but it does seem like a lot of people are going. I mean, there's been some troubles people have noted about using the 495X one, which is for new construction. So it seems like anecdotally, we think more people will be using the 465, the office conversion one. But I don't know what the timelines are. I forget. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's talk about scaffolding. Yeah. Let's return to your old favorite. So just for those who did not listen to the last episode, drop everything right now.
Yeah.
Go back to listen to the last episode. You can come back to this because this is like watching Dune 2 before you see Dune. Yeah. Scaffolding was obviously one of your major wins when you were on the city council.
Not long after you were guest, I think.
Not long.
That was a win.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, subtly taking credit for that.
We take credit for it here. Well, I mean, look, we do a lot of work here, mainly in like developing property access agreement scenarios with sidewalk sheds, but it's no one likes them.
Yeah. Literally.
Yeah. I think it's
rainy day.
It's like that rare like 98.2 issue probably, right?
Yes.
That everybody can agree on. Maybe this is anecdotal, but also you live here, you have a lot of colleagues here, you have a lot of political colleagues here. Is the legislation working? Are sheds coming down? What's the state of play?
Let me just do a step back. So this is like, scaffolding is such a New York thing. It's like
New York City
thing. I feel like when people come to visit New York, they ask about scaffolding. They ask about like why our trash is on the street. We're actually fixing that too. They ask about those like candid steam things. I don't know how to fix that. Or if I want to, I feel like it's iconic.
You're not Spider-Man. You can't fix everything.
But scaffolding in my first campaign in 2017 was when I won for city council. I had a coffee shop owner who actually mentioned to me they were putting scaffolding up, and that it was going to be like the death knell. And he just did a math. He's like, I have to sell 300 cups of coffee a day. I'll sell 270 or whatever the number was now. And he's like, and every day I will sell less and less and less until I'm out of business. And I just like remember that until years later, a friend of mine said to me, what is going on with why is there so much scaffolding up in the city? And it felt like one of those issues we always had just said, well, I don't know, it's like part of the area. And then I had somebody actually raise the project agreements, which I never knew about.
Access agreement.
Yeah, access agreements, which I know is like a whole different beast. But then like just like I was thinking about the coffee shop owner. I was thinking about like a couple areas in my district we got a lot of complaints from, and the commonality was scaffolding.
Yeah.
And just the idea that like government doesn't really work if you let them put this up forever and there's no incentives or consequences for it.
You can't even
So
go to court to get like they can be abandoned and a judge can't do
yes,
anything.
right. So I was like, we're going to do something about this. So we passed the legislation in my last year of the council, and then it's starting to go into effect. And I'll give you some news about it. Number one is we passed the bills, and we left a little bit of leeway in there for the mayor, especially the new mayor, Department of Buildings Commissioner, to decide some of the rules exactly by years, like exactly because we wanted to get rid of the 5-year one size fits. So for those who aren't informed, basically every building has to go through this process every 5 years, inspect your building, and that often leads to scaffolding going up and many times scaffolding not coming down because people don't want to pay for the work or whatever else it might be. So we want to do a couple things. One is change the 5-year mandate, one size fits all, because it doesn't make sense. New buildings going up 5 years later, I have to put it up. We wanted to make it aesthetically more pleasing. In the law, mandated that green color, a dark green that you see on everyone. It's like in the law. So we got rid of that and we put a whole bunch of new different designs in. And then we want there to be some consequences for putting it up and never taking it down. So we did all of that. So what's happening now is they're actually now starting to roll those things out. So they announced a bunch of new designs that are kind of, I think, fun and interesting. I think there's one I saw that like it's open air. You can kind of open air, like you can see through. You can like see there's netting. So you're going to potentially see
Banksy's
doing that. We're putting him to work.
Yeah.
No, but you're going to see like a lot of new designs that hopefully will make it a little bit nicer, more sunlight, things like that. Second is the mayor did I was with him. They did a press conference a couple of weeks ago where number one, in campus-like places, so where I live in Stuyvesant Town, or if you live on a college campus or you live in the public housing, there were these onerous rules that when you put it up, you had to put it everywhere. So your whole campus would be filled up. So we actually changed that, and nobody really talked about it when we did it. But we actually did an announcement last week for a bunch of public housing developments here in the city that we're going to take a lot of it down. And literally while we were at the press conference, the guys were taking it down. And so that you're not going to fill these common areas, these open spaces with it, which for a lot of...
As soon as the press conference ended, they stopped.
They put it back up. But also because like they're becoming really these unsafe spaces,
right,
and really dark and stuff like that. And then we are changing the timeline. So buildings are going to go through different regimes now. I put it up to 12 years. I doubt any building's going to get to 12, but you could get 8 years or something else. So and we're going to do, there's other things going on. They're putting a lot more pressure on buildings to get it down who've been up for a long time. And for city-owned property.
How are they doing that? What are the...
Some of it's like honestly contacting property owners and telling them the law's changed. We're going to start charging you fines for it. Or what do you need for us to get it done? City-owned buildings, we're taking them down. So there's buildings that are owned by the city where we're part of the problem. So trying to expedite those ones. There's like a whole regime of things.
What about now I'm throwing out policy.
Yeah.
What about compensating the people affected by the scaffolding? So you want to keep it up. You're obligated. Don't pay money to the city. Pay money to the coffee store owner.
Well, one of the story when we were talking about this entire issue, felt like I was the one who was really talking a lot about the small business owners who are underneath them, because it stinks to be a small business owner and this is going up. And if you're in a really good building and they're financially solvent and they're like, this will be up and down, maybe you can live with it. But if you're not, and you don't always know, and sometimes you're in like a co-op building and they have to do an assessment and they have to go to their residents and it costs a lot of money. They delay the work. So, you know what you're getting. So I have been thinking a little bit about ways that we could try to make the build businesses of a certain size who get buried underneath it for a certain amount of time, create some package of relief. And it may not be the owner paying them. It may be some relief from the city somehow. Trying to figure that piece out. But I certainly empathize with them about what it feels like. So I'm trying to figure that out. And there is actually legislation on the project access agreements in Albany. It feels, I've not delved into that one quite as much.
Oh, we should delve
We
into.
got to look into it.
We'll
Yeah,
start
I guess I
lobbying.
do.
We'll,
Yeah.
we'll delve.
Yes.
We'll get the right assembly person to come on to talk
Yes.
about it. And grill them with questions.
Yeah.
So, I think the governor's last budget committed over 1.5 billion to new housing funding. From your perspective, how does the assembly take steps to ensure that money is going to the right place, so that new housing is going to get built in the foreseeable future?
Yeah, it's two things. One is like we're trying to get always a lot more money into that pot, and then unlocking all the ways to get it done to actually build a project. So I think we're generally doing okay in terms of making sure the money gets deployed.
Yeah.
But again, we always have to remember when I was negotiating as a city councilor on these different projects, like it's not an infinite pot of money.
Yeah.
Every time you pull a dollar from more onto your project, it's going away from someone else. Now, you don't really care. You're trying to get your project, the best possible thing here. But these were like stressful conversations sometimes about how to do it. So you have to remember it's a finite pot, but we are trying to get a lot more money into it. Into the overall sort of housing budget so we can deploy more money to get more affordable housing built. And that's like a winner kind of across the board. It's just more about what the resources and the financial situation look like.
So in the months leading up to the election and after the mayor was elected, a lot what we heard from not just clients, but friends, clients, podcast guests was concern about the New York City real estate market, New York City business. I personally, I think, thought at the time that a lot of it was overblown. New York City is New York City, irrespective of what the political headwinds are at the moment. But we're, I guess, roughly 4 months into his administration now. I'm not so concerned about your thoughts as like, I'm sure I probably could guess your thoughts as to the job he's doing. You said you were standing next to him a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
But what are you hearing from like your constituents and small businesses, and is some of the fear eroding? Are there new fears?
I think look, there was definitely a polarization and there was a lot of support. And, I represent I have an interesting story politically in this because I represented probably one of a very strong, and when I was in the council, a very strong Cuomo stronghold on the Upper East Side. And my current assembly district, which was the bottom half of my council district, was a Zoran stronghold. Like, their margins were flipped. It was like 56 to 35. And I think a little bit of, by the way, I think there's a difference between renters and owners because of what he's talking about.
Right.
And youth, young age, and all these like tying in factors. But I actually do think there's something about renters and communities of renters that actually respond more favorably to what he's talking about and feel that affordability crisis kind of in a different way.
Also, younger people.
And younger, and the renters are younger. Yeah, there's all the things.
Right.
Yeah. I think the jury's still kind of out. I mean, even amongst my constituents. I mean, there are those who are like hardcore against, and there are those, of course, who are very for. But I think in that sort of middle spot where you actually see like favorability go up and down, I think the next few months will tell a lot about whether on the rent freeze, on tax hikes and all this stuff, how this all shakes out. And he's got a budget, there's a whole issue with the city budget right now. They need money, a debate about how they get there. There's been a feud within the council and the mayor over it recently. So I think how that shakes out will actually tell more of the story, but he's still riding on the benefit of the doubt of things. And I think one thing he seems to have changed a lot is like, just like the appearance of the man. Like I literally was watching videos yesterday where he's
walking the street.
He walks right past my house.
Yeah.
Like you walk outside in town, walking around, and there is
actually our podcast, probably the person who initially booked you ran into him on the street and tried to book him for this podcast. And he ignored her. So if you have any sway.
Well, how many of those do you think he is?
But like, there's something about that, and you see the star power when he's out there. And I think the jury is still out. And I think he's certainly changing some of his positions on certain areas. I think in something about public safety and other things that I think will help a little bit with the people that are deeply concerned. But I think it's just like still a question of where this all lands in the next few months. But look, one of the things I'll tell you Like, I like his focus on the scaffolding stuff he did with us. The pothole blitz he's doing. So ideally, like next year, you don't need a pothole blitz because everything's sort of working right. But I think he would be smart to focus on issues that do impact your daily life, and improve on those as a way to kind of flex that government's working under his watch.
Yeah, I think no matter what, he's just politically, he's going to be fine because I think for an executive in New York City, particularly like now in the Instagram, TikTok age, like effective communication, PR, sharply made content, like that's almost like 75% of the game. And he's like so far ahead the rest of certainly the Democratic Party.
Well, in a world where it's really hard to get things to sink in about here's what I'm doing, he is very good at making sure people know what he's up to, had ways to things to reach people, has a huge following, and is an effective communicator. And look, I mean, the story here is like, if you stay out of trouble, you'll get reelected. And you'll probably hold on to enough support no matter what. It's when you get yourself, and I don't think he's getting yourself trouble, but if you get yourself in trouble, that's what our previous mayor ran into. And
he ran into a lot of trouble.
He ran into a lot of trouble. Yeah, seemingly endless. But I think if you don't do that, I think you got reelected once, and I think that's very possible.
Yeah. Well, Mike, anything else that you want to touch on before we close shop and thank Keith for his time?
No, I guess this is actually a good closer because you've been in public service for your whole career. Yeah. How could a young person who's listening to this, I don't know how many young people we have listening to this, but let's say that they are.
We have as many as watch the mayor's reels, I think. It's like
there you go.
It's a very similar demo.
15 million.
But how would that crowd get into public service if they wanted to, or older crowd too? It's never too late, right?
Look, there's a million ways. And I mean, it is everything from literally, let's say you're someone who's retired, you can go, like, I have people come volunteer my office. Like, I want to do something. I want to be involved. Like, people who knock on doors and campaign and do all this other stuff. So like, there's a lot of different access points. I always say, like, find an issue you care about, find an organization working on that issue, and go volunteer. And some are more public facing than others. There's a no shortage of like different ways to be more involved. I also think, like, just really honestly, the most convenient way is just find something in your neighborhood to be more involved we need a lot more young people involved in, like, we have all these like little block associations of that. And I'm like sometimes hesitant to send people to these things, but like they are actually where a lot of decisions are getting made. You're meeting your elected officials. I mean, a lot of young people more involved. So just find that little like thing. And the other thing I'd say is there's just not a lot of places for people who don't work in politics. There are not a lot of places where to find people that like think and act commonly. So like, I think the mayor's race actually did bring a lot of young people to say, hey, like, I'm now hearing things I care about being talked about by somebody in my age range. So, I think you should also just create access points. Like, say, hey, I know like a couple of my friends who are interested in politics. Like, let's go to create a little club or whatever. Like, I'm not joking. Like, a lot of our like current Democratic clubs that exist today started back in the Vietnam War, or protesting this or that or the other thing. It's just not actually that hard to put a dozen people together who live near each other and say, let's invite our council member to come and talk. And I tell you, a lot of like, if you have like 20 constituents in a room and they invite you to just come have coffee and have a chat, like, the electeds will show up.
You can get people here. So
there you go.
20, I mean, we don't even live here, so we can't vote.
But I say this like earnestly, like, if you're like, hey, I'll have like a bunch of people at my house, we'll just like invite our assembly member to come over, like, and if hopefully it's friendly, like, you will get that. Like, it's actually like not that hard. And look, when we run for office, we do a million of these house parties. So one thing, and this is actually, I'll say for elected officials should do more of, and I should take my own advice, is when we run for office, we do a million different house parties. We go meet people everywhere, whatever. And we actually don't do that enough in between. We don't see our voters enough, like, in spots. So I tend to get the regular crowds a lot. And actually, like, what there could be a lot more of, and you can organize this, or electeds could more, is like, just like doing the sort of normal, hey, I'd love to just like get people into a room and chat. So like that type of stuff, like, you don't have to be that educated. I mean, and by the way, the last thing I'll say is, like, you hold the power. You can hire and fire me or the mayor or anybody, and it's not the other way around. So, find a way to healthily engage, I think. Look, on a lot of the issues that we're talking about here, I think it's been encouraging in the last couple of years because there's been a lot more people I've met who have found some way to get involved. Like I'm do a lot with like the abundance movement in the city. And there's a lot of people who come from different walks who actually were just like kind of fed up with housing policy in the city or other things and kind of created groups to meet and get together and like found electeds who would go and talk with them. And like, didn't take that much, you know? So it can be very, very local. I care about my local park. Or it can be like, I live in the city. I just like, there's an issue I care about. And I want to find people. And the internet makes it very easy to connect people to do that. Awesome.
Yeah, that's great stuff. Well, Keith, if people want to find out more about you, what you're working on right now, where can they go?
All my social media is all, I think, at Keith Powers NYC. So Twitter, Instagram, everything else. So you can just go there. You can always sign up for our newsletter, go to our website. I would go to our social media. It's a little more exciting than the Assembly website, but we're doing a lot of new legislation as we're up there, and there's a lot going on with the budget and the end of sessions. We have a newsletter you can sign up to, but also just socials or Keith Powers NYC.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys.
See you again soon.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
For more on all things real estate and the law, subscribe to this and our other podcasts. Follow Bergstein, Flynn, Knowlton, and Polina on social media. Subscribe to our newsletter and go to bfklawoffice.com. That's bfklawoffice.com to learn more.